On behalf of the Philosophical Society of St. Stephen's College, I welcome you all to the lecture Musing on Music, delivered by our beloved professor from the Philosophy Department here at St. Stephen's, Mr. Professor Wilson Samuel sir. Wilson sir completed his BA, MA and MPhil from St. Stephen's College and is currently pursuing his PhD from Delhi University. He has been trained in Western classical piano. He's also been trained in philosophy, and that's why we are gathered here today. This lecture will be followed by a question-answer session. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out time to deliver this lecture for us. And thank you to all of you for coming. We really hope you enjoy. Now I'll hand it over to you.
Right, thank you everyone for being here. I was going to play little short clippings of music. I'm not sure, I thought I could use that, but that's not loud enough. So I'm just going to play it through the mic and hopefully that should be enough. So when we get there, we'll see. Right? Okay, so before I start, am I audible? Okay, great. So before I start, some disclaimers. First is that whenever I talk about music, I'm going to be talking about music as practiced in the Western classical tradition. Most of contemporary pop and jazz also has roots in Western classical tradition. This is mostly because I'm most familiar with the Western classical tradition. But I suppose that a lot of the issues that are going to be raised here can be applied to other traditions as well. And in fact, there could be philosophical issues that are peculiar to some traditions, but for our talk, we are mostly going to be dealing with Western classical traditions and things that have come from them. Second thing is, this is not going to be an in-depth academic dive into philosophy of music. That's a very serious topic, but I am hoping this is that it will be like a small peek into the ways in which philosophy thinks about music and interacts with music, and hopefully it should pique your curiosity enough to want to explore the intersection of philosophy and music. Right? With that, let's start by listening to some piece of music, and we will start thinking about it. Hopefully it should work. Does anyone recognize that song? Yeah, it's Viva La Vida by Coldplay, a very old song. Quite a popular song. There's a reason why I'm making you listen to these songs. Hopefully it should be clear in a way, right? Let's listen to another piece of music. Anyone recognize that?
John Coltrane.
Yes, it's Coltrane, it's Giant Steps. So an excerpt from his music called Giant Steps, which I think was sort of towards his later years. Do I need the mic? Am I audible? Okay, great. So the recording needs the mic. Okay. Yeah, so that was John Coltrane, jazz. What we heard before was contemporary, that's jazz. There's Another one. Okay, does anyone recognize that?
Schoenberg?
Yes. The Schoenberg, musician and composer who wouldn't like to be called as composing atonal music, but that's why it sounded a little weird and just off, right? It didn't feel like anything that Coldplay would feel like. That's much more comfortable. Jazz, still quite comfortable, but a lot of people don't enjoy it. That difficult to enjoy, but nevertheless, still called music, right? Anyway, so the idea is that we are all exposed to a great variety of music, like you just heard. So it's nearly impossible to remain isolated from music, right? So sometimes we actively go out to seek music. We go for concerts, or we might even perform, or we might choose to just passively listen to a song by sitting in a car, or while traveling back home, or we may even let our bodies move a little bit while listening to songs in a party or something, right? But these ways of engaging with music, whether actively or passively, means that we have some intuitive understanding of how to respond to music, right? And the fact that we not only engage with music by listening, but also by creating music means that our understanding of music is more than just cursory. It's quite robust and rich. So if we don't have any trouble engaging with music like this, in all sorts of ways, what does a philosophical engagement bring to the table? Why do we need a philosophical engagement? So in order to answer this question, we need to have some understanding of what is a philosophical engagement, right? So what is a philosophical engagement? Well, very simply, it begins with questions, lots of questions. What, why, how. But all fields, all academic disciplines ask questions. So what's so special about philosophical questions? So you can think of philosophical questions as being different in two important ways, right? First is with respect to the answers to the questions. So the answers to philosophical questions generally resist a consensus, an agreement, and therefore they withhold easy answers. Now the difficulty in answering these questions is further compounded by the fact that sometimes even the method that we want to use to answer these questions, there's no consensus on the method either. Now this does not mean that there are no genuine attempts at answering these questions. Philosophers have always attempted to answer difficult questions, and they will continue to do so even if there are no easy answers and there are no answers that everyone can agree on. Right? The second way in which philosophical questions are different from questions in other disciplines is with respect to the questions themselves. Now, these questions are usually aimed at the accepted fundamentals of disciplines, which are assumed to be true or which are just taken to be self-evidentially true. Right? So, the foundational elements that make the questions asked by different disciplines meaningful, those foundational elements themselves are called into question by philosophy, right? Which basically means that there is nothing that is simply accepted. There is nothing that is beyond the realm of question, right? Everything that can be assumed can be questioned. Now, these characteristics of philosophical engagement has a very interesting consequence, which is that there is an abundance of questions, but a scarcity of answers. So, the merits or the demerits of being in a situation where you have more questions than answers is a topic for another time. It warrants a discussion of its own. But for our purposes, we just need to know that a philosophical engagement means that we probably are going to end up asking more questions than answering them, and we should be okay with that, right? engagement with music, what does that look like? As with any other, as with a philosophical engagement with any other issue, it means that we need to ask questions, questions that don't have any easy answers, and question things that we take for granted or are just assumed to be true. Right? Now, the idea that you can ask not many questions means that you have many questions, but of course, given the limits of time, we can only focus on a few of them. So the ones that I want to focus on, the areas in which I want to focus on are the relationship between music and emotions, music and language, and music and value. Right? Okay? But before we go further, there is a very useful distinction that, and a very important distinction that I want to make between song and music. And to make that point, I want to show this clip from, what is that from? Yeah, Tunk on Earth. It's a comedy show set up as a documentary where the host, Philomena Kang, takes people through different ages of the world and has a hilarious take on culture and history. And she also interviews actual experts and asks them the most ridiculous questions, which surprisingly somehow are profound, right? So this is a clipping from one such interview, so we should be able to hear it.
I mean, was Beethoven good at music?
Yeah, I mean, he's considered to be the best composer of Western classical music ever.
Beethoven wrote that song that goes da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. What do those lyrics mean?
Well, it's a really strong orchestral motif.
It's just the word dum over and over again. Is it a dig at his audience or is it German for something?
With the Beethoven's symphonic music, it's all just instruments, so there are no words to these pieces at all.
No lyrics. How are we supposed to know what it's about if there's no lyrics? It's literally meaningless.
Yeah, right. So that's it's quite hilarious. If you haven't watched Tunk on Earth, you should definitely watch it. It's quite hilarious. So the idea is that meaning is conveyed in language, right? So we know what a song is about because the lyrics tell us what it's about. For example, let's hear this. Alright, what is that? You recognize that song?
John Mayer.
Yes, it's John Mayer and it's a song called You're Gonna Live Forever in Me. Now, what is that song about? What do you think that song is about?
It's about the better half. He's saying that you are gonna live forever within me.
Yeah, it's basically about loving someone.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And how did you know that it was about loving someone? Because you listened to the lyrics, right? So, the reason we want to distinguish between song and music is because we are currently asking questions about music, right? There are some very interesting questions about language and music and the effect they have on each other in song. But for our purposes, it will just muddy the waters. So what I'm going to do is when I talk about music, I'm going to talk about pure music, which is unaccompanied by any lyrics, right? So that's one very important distinction. Now, before we even get into talking about the relationship between music, value, emotions, and language, we have to first ask the most basic question. What is music? What is it? This obviously seems as quite an absurd question. I mean, we obviously all understand what music is, that's why we are sitting here, otherwise you wouldn't come to this point, right? But one of the frustrating things about a philosophical engagement is that it takes seemingly simple things and just complicates them, right? Like this present question. Now, the reason this happens is probably because philosophy attempts to mostly express explicitly what is implicitly understood in the hopes of gaining more clarity, right? So, in the hope of gaining more clarity, we need to define music so that we can be sure of our object of inquiry and guard against any possible confusion. Now, when we define things, what do? We are looking for some features that help us differentiate the object that we are defining from other objects, right? Sounds simple enough, but the usual challenge is when we are defining things that we seem to be intuitively familiar with, like music, is that we don't want our definition to include things that we intuitively think are not the object we are defining. Neither do we want it to exclude things that we intuitively think belong to the class of objects that we are defining. When we end up including things that we don't want, then our definition is too wide. Right? It takes things that we don't want to accept. And when we end up excluding things we want, our definition is too narrow. It leaves out things that we would want our definition to capture. So we want a definition of music that is neither wide nor narrow. Okay. So, what is music? Is it sound? It's not obviously just sound, right? Because many things that can be heard as sound is not music. So that definition is obviously too wide. Well then, is it organized sound? Once again, that idea is also too wide since it includes all sorts of sound that do not intuitively count as music, like the sound of a machine or even speech is organized sound, right? But we don't want to call that music. But it seems like all music is organized sound, even if all organized sound is not music, right? So maybe there are some features of music that are organized in a way in which other sounds aren't. What are these organized features then? So when you learn how to play an instrument, if you, like I'm sure most of you, a lot of you must have, you learn about two aspects of music. One is pitch and the other is rhythm. Pitch is the difference in frequencies of the notes, right? So low pitch, high pitch, and other things. And rhythm is the difference in the duration of each sound, right? So you play one note for 4 beats or 2 beats or whatever, right? Maybe these are the distinguishing features of music. So any sound with pitch and rhythm would be music. So does that mean that now we can just settle down and say that we have defined music as just sound that has rhythm and pitch? Well, let's see. Okay, do you think that's music? That definitely had pitch. It definitely had rhythm. Quite varied, but would we call that music? I'm not too sure. Although we call that bird song, right? But that's just a way of referring to the sounds that bird makes. I'm not too sure if people call it music, even if it has pitch and rhythm. But that, of course, is a very obviously not music sort of an example, but take a look at this. Has anyone ever come across that before? It's an actual song composed by with the name of the composer. Very famous composer who's composed other very popular tunes also, but this is on the typewriter. Okay. Now here's the interesting question about this. The orchestra is obviously playing music, right? No questions about that. But would we say that the person doing whatever he was doing on the typewriter is playing music? There is rhythm there, obviously, and there's also change in pitch, even if it is like two notes, right? But we wouldn't want to call that music, which means that merely a sound, merely having pitch and rhythm is still too wide a net for us to capture the definition of music, right? But maybe there is a way to think about these features that help us retain the intuition that pitch and rhythm are integral to music, while not having to accept intuitively not musical sounds like what he was doing on the typewriter. What we need to do is think of the features as not being part of the sound, but as part of the way it is produced or perceived. So it is not the pitch and rhythm of the sound itself that makes it music, but the sound being perceived as having a musical pitch and rhythm. We can also look at the way in which sounds are produced and the purposes for which those sounds are produced as a way of distinguishing musical and non-musical sounds. So theories that try to define music in this way emphasize not on the sound itself, but on the listener or the composer of the sounds. In other words, the focus shifts from the sounds to the humans involved, more precisely to the minds involved. Right? This may provide a much richer way of explaining what music is, but given the complexities of the human mind, it's not really an easy way of defining music, since now you're trying to define music as something that happens when you perceive sounds. Right? Now, pitch and rhythm being an important part of music is obvious, but this understanding of music seems a little limited, since when we listen to music, we are not simply understanding the pitch and rhythm. In fact, most of the times we are not consciously aware of the rhythm and the pitch and the structures that are there in the music that we are listening to. What affects us more than the pitch and the rhythm is the overall experience of listening to music. So when we are trying to define music, maybe we should look beyond pitch and rhythm. Maybe the features that we are looking for to define music are aesthetic in nature, right? Concepts like beauty or pleasurable experiences and so on. Maybe it is some aesthetic property of a particular sound that makes it music, or maybe it is a particular kind of aesthetic experience in a person that is due to the sound that makes the sound music. Once again, either we can try to define music this way by looking at some aesthetic property of the sounds itself, or we can look at the experience of a person and find some aesthetic features in that experience that is because of the sounds. Right? Either way, defining music by looking at just the aesthetic properties of the sound or the experience also seems too broad, because there are sounds that have aesthetic properties and can evoke an aesthetic experience, but they don't intuitively count as music. Poetry is an example like that, and the related example is freestyle rap. Of course, usually rap as produced is accompanied with music, but freestyle rap is just a version of poetry, right? Or even the bird song that we listened to earlier, right? There is an aesthetic experience there, but we still don't want to call it music. The interesting thing about defining music as in terms of aesthetic experience is that it also seems a narrow definition, because there are parts of music that we use to create a piece, say scales or arpeggios, which is just a series of notes that we use, or even finger exercises which are elaborate, can think of them as pieces of music. By this definition, they won't really be called music, although scales and arpeggios are proper parts of music, right? So it seems like we don't necessarily want to exclude those, but if you define music just using aesthetic experiences or aesthetic features, then we are probably going to exclude those, right? So, answering the question, what is music, is itself a difficult task, and the different ways in which you can answer this question has its own challenges. My take is that in a definition of music, we probably have to look at it holistically. So what we need to do is recognize that there is pitch and rhythm, and there's pitch and rhythm as a feature of the sound, and there's also pitch and rhythm as a feature of us perceiving that sound. There are also aesthetic features. Again, you can locate these aesthetic features in the sound, and you can also locate them in the experience that a person has while listening to music. You take all of these together, and then you can make a holistic definition. This, of course, is a much more complex approach, which, as usually music theories like this usually are complex. So we can't really get into it, but that's just a glimpse into what a robust definition of what music is could probably look like. But there's another way in which you can approach this idea of defining music. This is a general approach that is taken in art, is that you basically say that there can't be a definition of music, because music may not be a stable object that is out there whose features you can capture in a definition. Maybe it is constantly evolving, socioculturally evolving, right? Maybe it is dynamic. So what happens here is it's a deflationary approach where you just completely disregard the question of defining music as pointless. We can't really get into how that can be done, but I'll just leave with this, is that this leaves the door open for a lot of things to count as music, or a lot of things to not count as music, right? This is not really a problem for people who simply listen to music to enjoy music, but only a problem to the philosopher who wants a very neat boundary of what counts as music, right? Okay. Now, another problem that bothers only the philosopher and not the person who listens to music, who simply just enjoys the music, is about the enjoyment of the music itself. So, like a true philosopher who, like I said in the beginning, is concerned more with the questions than answering them, let's leave aside questions of definition and let's move on to thinking about the connection between music and emotions. So, to start off, let's listen to this particular piece of music. Okay, what do we think about that? What do you feel about that piece of music? Huh? Sad. Anyone else? Sad. Sad. That seems to be the intuitive response, right? It's sad. Huh?
Tense, unresolved.
Yes, tense, unresolved. That, anyone recognize that piece of music? Yeah.
Is it Chopin's Prelude?
Yeah, Prelude in E minor. Chopin's Prelude in E minor. Beautiful piece of music. Short piece of music, just painfully beautiful, right? So yeah, the moment we listen to that, we just associate the emotion of sad, right? Okay, all right. Let's listen to another one. Any guesses on what that was? Urgency. Huh? Sorry? Yeah. Yeah, hasteness. Anything else? late for something, okay, yeah, urgency, is it because it's quick? Any other emotions?
Very complex.
Complex, okay. Now that piece is, anyone knows what that piece is? Huh? Well, yeah, he played it, but yeah, that's a piece by Beethoven called Rage Over a Lost Penny. The full name of that piece is Rage Over a Lost Penny Expressed in a Caprice. Right? Now, do you think that sort of captures rage and also rage over a lost penny? Right? So, that manages to convey something. That and the previous piece, which is almost immediate. And the previous piece was even more immediate. Everyone just said sad. Here it's a little more complex. Right? Okay, so we want to say that that piece of music is sad, right? Now, what exactly do I mean when I say that it is sad? Am I saying that this piece of music makes me sad? Or am I saying that the music is sad regardless of what I'm feeling? That it has the capacity to make people feel the emotion of sadness or its related emotions. Right? What am I saying? Whatever way I say it, it's quite puzzling to see how music is tied to emotions, right? Now, if I say that music expresses some emotions, right? Let's see what happens. The immediate question is how? How does music express emotion, right? Emotions are applicable to conscious subjects who experience and express emotions. Right? Music is not a conscious subject. It is, of course, used by conscious subjects, and we would like to think that it can be used to express emotions. But the question is, how exactly do we do that? Right? Now, one way to deal with this issue is to suggest that when we say that a piece of music is sad, we are merely using emotive words to point to some features of the music itself. Maybe the tempo or the dynamic, which is the volume changes, or some particular progression of chords. So basically what we're trying to say is that when I say that it is sad, I am sort of pointing to the fact that it is slow and it has some minor chords in it and it has some particular chordal progression. That's what I'm saying. Now the problem with this, if you want to see it as a problem, is that it dismisses any real connection of emotion with music, right? Which could fail to capture the intuitions we have about emotions and music. And also, it's a little difficult to see how emotional features can simply be reduced to sonic features or features of sound, right? Another similar suggestion is to explain the emotional features of music by conventional associations of certain emotions with certain features of the music, like the tempo or the dynamics and the articulation and other things. Now here what we are saying is that the association between certain features in the music and the emotion is not necessary, but it's only conventional. Right? It's a matter of historical coincidence, perhaps, that everyone who wanted to say something sad using music used minor chords and wrote in in a slow tempo, which is soft. Right? Now this just means this just invites the question: why is it that we are choosing those particular features for those particular emotions? Right? If it's just a matter of convention and I can choose anything, why are we choosing that? Why do we associate those emotions with those features? Right? So it's a little difficult to accept that the associations are a matter of real convention and therefore arbitrary. Just to make this point, let's listen to this piece. Okay, what is anyone? Yes, that's Mozart. That was and kind of Nacht music, which is basically a little night music. Now, would you say that I can associate that sort of song with emotions related to death? It doesn't seem intuitively possible. It seems like a very upbeat, high tempo, positive sounding, chirpy music, as how Mozart usually is, right? And so it's difficult to take seriously the suggestion that associations between features of music and the emotions are a matter of mere convention and that they are not necessary. That it could have been any other way. It's difficult to take that suggestion seriously, right? So the difference between this and the previous suggestion that there is no real connection between music and emotions is only that in the first one it dismisses all connection. In the second one, it merely says that it is a matter of mere convention, thereby making it not necessary. Right? Another very intuitive idea is that what is the emotional expressiveness of music? It is actually the expression of the composer or the performer's emotions. So, a composer writes a certain kind of piece to express a certain kind of emotion, and a performer plays a certain kind of piece to express a certain kind of emotion. Now, that seems all right at first glance, but there is a problem. The problem is that a performer may perform a piece that is sad without actually feeling sad, or a happy piece without feeling happy. This means that the emotions expressed by the music are independent of the emotions of the performer. Similarly, a composer may want to express a particular emotion but fail to do so because he is not a good composer, even if he actually feels that emotion. This once again means that there is a disconnect between the emotions expressed by the music and the emotions felt by the composer or the performer. So it's hard to maintain that the emotional expressiveness of the music is simply the emotional expressiveness of the composer or the performer. Now, another intuitive idea that is similar to this idea is that instead of the emotional expressiveness of music being located in the performer or the composer, it is actually located in the listener or the audience. So, the emotional expressiveness of the music is the arousal of emotions in the audience. So, a particular music piece is sad because it has a tendency to arouse feelings of sadness in the listener. Now, this idea also has similar problems to the previous one because we can think of cases where competent listeners of music fail to feel that emotion even if we associate a certain kind of music as sad. So again, there seems to be a disconnect between the emotions felt by the listener and the emotions supposedly expressed by the music. Right? Now, a very interesting take on tackling the emotional expressive nature of music is to suggest that there is a resemblance between particular features of music and the behavioral expression of particular emotions. So the reason why we feel sad when listening to some kind of music is that there are some features of that particular piece of music that resemble our behavioral expressions of that emotion. Right? So for example, a sad piece is going to be slow and soft, just like how our bodily movements may lose quickness and we may slump and lose strength at the news of a very sad news. Right? Or an upbeat or loud and quick music is just as how our expressions and our bodily movements have a certain lightness and swiftness to them when we are happy. Right? So, what we are saying is that the reason why music is emotionally expressive is because there are certain features in music that resemble the actual behavioral expressions of that particular emotion. Right? Now, this sort of an idea is quite complicated to explicate, but it seems to avoid the pitfalls of the previous two ideas. Because the emotional expressiveness of music is explained independently of the actual emotions of the people involved, while trying to link the emotion with the music by taking into account the behavioral aspects of emotion and some particular features of music like the tempo, the dynamic and the articulation and other things. right? Now, in the beginning of the section, I stated that when we say that some music is sad, I could either mean that the music expresses the emotion sad or that I feel sad when I hear a particular piece of music. So this was all about what happens if we say that the music expresses the emotion of sad. What happens when we say that we feel sad when we listen to a particular piece of music? The question that we should start is, why should we respond emotionally to music at all? Right? And the force of this question comes from the fact that emotions are always about something. We are sad about something, maybe the loss of a relationship or the failure to achieve an important goal. We are happy about something, maybe finding a new relationship or achieving a certain long pursued dream. And the kinds of things that evoke these responses seem to be events that are appropriate enough to elicit the kind of responses that they do. Right? So loss of something usually leads to grief, sadness. Gaining something important usually leads to happiness. Now it is an important question why that is the case, but that is a different question. Maybe because we are hardwired to think like whatever hardwiring is. Anyway. Now, the issue for explaining emotional responses to music is that the object or the event towards which our emotions are generally directed are missing. When we feel sad or happy listening to music, we are not really sad or happy about anything in particular. I'm not sad about the piece, or I'm not angry about the piece, or my anger and my sadness is not directed towards the piece, just as it is when we are actually sad about something. Right? So our emotions have nothing to be aimed towards, and yet we don't want to say that we don't respond emotionally to music, that we don't feel the feelings that we feel. Now, a related question that's puzzling is, why do we enjoy music that seems to evoke negative emotions in us, like sadness, right? Quote unquote negative. We don't go out seeking experiences in our life that will make us sad, right? But we do enjoy tragedies. We do enjoy tragic stories, even if we don't want, obviously, that kind of a tragedy to happen to us, right? So we enjoy listening to sad music, but we don't want events in our life to make us sad. So how do we explain this? Now, a promising way to look at this is to go back to the idea of resemblance, right? In which we said that the emotional expressiveness of music is due to the resemblance it bears to our behavioral expressions of that emotion. Now, variation of the resemblance theory says that the resemblance is not to actual emotional behavior, but to an imagined emotional response. Now, what does this mean? This basically means that the emotional expressiveness of music and consequently our emotional response to music is that a particular piece of music evokes in us an imagined expression of sadness, since it has features that resemble the emotional behavior of sadness. In other words, I create a scenario in my imagination where the music is seen as an expression of a particular emotion, and the reason I see it as such is because of the resemblance of some musical features with the behavioral expression of that emotion. Now, how exactly you flesh out this theory is beyond the scope of this talk, but the consequence of such a theory is that it explains our emotional response without needing anything actually to respond to. Right? So when we feel sad when we hear a sad piece of music, because it engenders an imaginative expression of sadness in us. We imagine the expression of sadness in whatever way. Right? Maybe we create a scenario where we felt sad, right? Or we remember a scenario in which we felt sad, or we create a scenario in which we would feel sad, right? So, since we are in the space of imagination, and we are not really, it evokes in us an imagination of sadness and not actual sadness, we are free to aim this emotion of sadness at whatever object we want, right? This could also explain why we seek out negative emotions in music. Since the emotions are evoked as an imagined expression, we are sort of in a safe space where we can enjoy the richness of emotions, including negative, positive emotions, without the burden of having any actual distressing events cause those negative emotions. right? Now, if we concede that the negativity of an emotion is only due to the distressing events that cause that emotion, then this explanation could work very well, right? Since now we experience, although imaginatively, a stimulating emotion like sadness divorced from any unwanted actual events. Now, of course, this means that how we assign values to emotion as happy as being positive and sad as being negative, that's a contentious topic. So the imagined expression theory will have to navigate all that, right? Nevertheless, it does seem like a promising idea to start dealing with these puzzles about music and emotion, right? Okay, so since we have been talking about the expressive ability of music, let's now start asking some questions about its relationship to language, which is the most robust tool we have for expressing and communicating a great many things. So, is music a language? Does it express things similar to language, as how language does? Does it communicate like language? Before we answer all those questions, let's listen to this. Okay, which piece of music? Huh? Yeah, where is it taken from? Yeah. Okay, before we get to that, I should not have asked that question first. What people who don't know what that piece of music is, what do you think that was about? What? Huh? A chase. Okay. All right. A chase of some sort. Okay, here, Tom and Jerry, yeah, chase of some sort. Okay, here's a clue. Did it feel like the sound of something in nature? No? Okay, it's called the flight of the bumblebee. Now, does it make sense? Did it sound like the buzzing of a bee? It could, if you listen to it. Once more, maybe it could, right? Now, what happened? This is actually taken from, I think, the opera in which, I forget the name of the opera, but in which the protagonist basically transforms into a bumblebee and he travels to search for his beloved or something, right? And this is the music that accompanies it, right? It seems like music, that there are some reasons to suggest that music and language are similar, right? Music can represent the sounds of nature, like the buzzing of a bee, the trickling of water, the roar of thunder, and in fact, in a lot of operas, when music accompanies them, there are specific instruments that are usually used to show something, right? And of course, language is also used to represent physical things, right? Now, music, as we saw, is also used to convey or evoke emotions. Language also does this. Both have symbolic modalities, which is basically to say that both have symbolic notation, right? You have written form in language. In music, also, you have written forms. Not all traditions do, but most traditions have some sort of a written form, right? Another very interesting thing, both of them seem to be uniquely human. We don't really find the rich linguistic capacities of human beings in any other species. Neither do we find the rich music-making capacities in any other species. There's also evidence from cognitive science that suggests that both music and language make use of certain common cognitive capacities. So both need a lot of working memory to store a lot of representational content. So to use language, you need to have a storage of vocabulary. To actively engage with music, you need to have a storage of, say, tunes and melodies and some progressions of chords and all. You need to have a storage of that, right? Both make use of some structural schemes and a system of rules. So grammar in language is an example, and even in music, when you compose, you pay attention to the different structures that is there in music, right? And you follow some sort of rules. Both create in our minds an expectation of what is to come. It's basically to say that when you're listening to someone speak, you can sort of expect what is going to come. In music also, when you're listening to a particular tune, you can sort of expect which note is going to come next, right? So all this seems to point that there are similarities between language and music, but is this enough to say that music is a kind of language? Not quite, because the differences between music and language is also quite substantial, right? So language deals with conceptual information, whereas music mainly seems to deal with affective information or emotions, right? So I cannot possibly convey to you the number of people in this room by writing a piece, right? Neither can I convey to you what the weather outside is like by playing something for you, right? So even if music conveys something, it does not convey in the same sense as how language conveys, and it does not convey the things that language could convey, right? So in that short clipping of Philomena Kang, where she says that it is literally meaningless, if we take meaning to be linguistic meaning, it is meaningless. It's just a bunch of random sounds, right? So even if we want to say that there's musical meaning, we are not using the meaning, the word meaning in the same way. So linguistic meaning does not seem to be the same as musical meaning, right? Another very important difference is that linguistic expressions can be truth valuable, whereas musical expressions cannot. Just to say that you can in language say that X is true and Y is false, but in music there is no concept of there being any truth valuable claim, right? Now the fact that music and language are both structured, that may suggest that it is similar, but when we get into the details of what these structures are like, it is quite obvious that there are many major differences. Now this is suggested by work in very popular work in linguistics and music theory by Ray Jackendorf and Fred Bedard. They have this theory called the generative theory of tonal music. We cannot get into the details of that, but if you're curious about the relationship between language and music, you should check that out. Now, what they show in their work is basically that the syntactical structures of language is not the same as the structures that we find in music, right? Both music and language, like I said, use some common cognitive capacities, but these capacities are not unique to just musical and linguistic capabilities. They are shared by other cognitive domains as well, such as visual perception, social interaction, environmental mapping. So the shared cognitive capacities are domain general, which suggests that musical and linguistic capability is not uniquely linked, right? So it does not seem like we can simply say that music is a language. While there remains questions about both of them being uniquely human, it would be prudent to understand claims like music is a language of emotions figuratively than literally, right? Okay, now for the final area that I want to talk about, music and time. Now, in this section, let's begin with an refreshingly perhaps a question that has a very easy answer. Is music valuable? Yes, it is. Okay, nobody is denying that, right? But that's where the question about music and value begins, but it doesn't end there. So the next question, which is also easy insofar as there are two clear answers that we can choose from, is what about music is valuable, right? And the two possible answers are these. One is the expressive ability of music, right? Like we saw, it can express emotions. And the other is the formal features that are there in music, What are these formal features? These formal features are basically structural features of music. So the relationship between different notes and the rhythmic structures. And these are made explicit in music theoretic descriptions of music. Right? Now, of course, if you say that the formal features are valuable, then music theory becomes a very important part of what we find valuable about music. Right? Now, why is our questions of value not as difficult as other questions? Because whichever answer we seek to choose, it is defended. Right? So if we say that the expressiveness of music as being valuable is that the expressiveness of music is valuable, we can easily accept this as long as we can defend that there is value in expressing emotions. Right? So if music can afford us a safe space, an imaginative space, like we saw, to experience all kinds of emotions, then it can be cathartic and even enriching, and therefore there is some value in the expressive ability of music. Right? Similarly, claiming that music is valuable because of its formal feature is a matter of defending the claim that the pursuit of understanding and engaging with abstract features of the world, as expressed in, say, mathematics or other art forms, have some value. Right? Maybe these are expressions of beauty, elegance, or other such properties. So, finding the value of music in either its expressiveness or its formal features, or even a combination of both, as is usually the case, affords us clarity at least about what we have to establish in order to locate the value of music. Right? So if we can show that there is value in experiencing and expressing emotions, then it is not difficult to show that the value of music lies in its emotional expressive abilities. And if we can show that there is value in understanding and engaging with formal features, then there should be no trouble in locating the value of music in its formal features. So with respect to answers about music and value, the problem is shifted to questions about the value of emotional expression and the pursuit and engagement with purely formal features. Now these are general questions for which the answers of which can be applied to a lot of different areas. So in that sense, it doesn't really trouble the philosopher of music as much as it just troubles the philosopher. So, talking about music and value is probably offers us some easy questions that we can answer, since we already know that I just need to establish that emotional expression has value, and therefore music has value in emotional expression, or that pursuing the knowledge of formal features has value, and therefore music has value since it has formal features which I can pursue. And with that, I would like to conclude this talk. So thank you all. Thank you also to Brinda, who helped me put up all these small clippings of music. And now we can open up for questions and discussions.
Hello, am I? Yeah. Okay, so we will have questions for some 30 minutes and try to take as many questions as we can. After that, we can assemble outside in the lawns, and if you wish to ask a question for the speaker, like this, if you have questions for the speaker, you can talk to him outside as well. So, yeah. Okay, so we have to shift to the room XC because session has been planned here right now. So the room is right there. Our volunteers will direct you, and we will have the question and answer session over there. Thank you for your cooperation.